Shane Stacks on the radio.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
Shall we play a game?
Why, yes. I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Getting geeky in Little Rock. And today, live from Little Rock, it's Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Stacks. Thanks so much for joining. Whether you're listening live on 101.1 FM, The Answer, in the Little Rock, Central Arkansas area, or via the online stream at 101.1 FM, theanswer.com, or if you're listening by podcast or on Krypton Radio or one of the many other ways that the show goes out after the live shows. I'm just darn glad to have you. Really excited. As all, every time I do my show, I'm excited. I always say, I'm excited for today's show. Well, it's because I am. I mean, it's cool. I do this show because I love it. And every topic I do, I try to do because I'm excited about it. So I always say that, but it's always true. And I'm excited for today's show because it's both a topic and a guest I've been working to do for quite a while. It's for a cool RPG. It's one of the core tabletop RPGs that's out there that, like, most people know of, even if they've never played it. So we're gonna be talking about that, and it's Shadowrun. And Shadowrun is just a really cool, a unique, fun, exciting, bonkers setting and role-playing game and lore that's just a heck of a lot of fun. And it's gone beyond the tabletop RPG into other areas. It's got books and all that we'll go over. With no further ado, I want to introduce my guest. First time on the show, hopefully not the last, Darryl Mott of Gamers Tavern. Darryl, welcome to Shane Plays.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, man, you are welcome. I know we've been trying to coordinate this for a while. You're a busy dude. And then this week, my guest that I had lined up had to postpone to a couple of weeks down the road, and you very graciously and ably jumped in to help out, which is great for me because selfishly I've been wanting to have you on for a long time. So, but I also know that you're at the end of your sleep cycle or wake cycle, so you may be a little bit slap happy.
I got coffee. I'm fine.
Okay. Well, slap happy, as we were talking on Discord, that's one of the main ways we stay in touch. As we were talking on Discord before the show, sometimes makes for some of the best radio. We're going to be talking about Shadowrun today, and Darryl is, out of everybody I've ever met, online or in real life or whatever, Darryl is not only the biggest fan of Shadowrun, but I've heard him talk about Shadowrun many times, and he genuinely knows his stuff. So he is the perfect guest to talk about.
The self-proclaimed world's greatest Shadowrun expert who's never actually worked on the game. Without ever actually having worked. Well, the way games work, it's possible that you know more than some of the game devs, because you've been involved since the beginning. So some of them it's true. Some of them, the only reason why I have that title is because they got jobs freelancing for the game.
Right.
So.
Exactly. Yeah. They were brought in to work on a module or one edition or something like that. So anyway, what I want to do before we talk about Shadowrun, and that's going to be the bulk of today's show, I wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself and to tell people about Gamers Tavern, because you have your own corner of the internet where you talk about video games and role-playing games and that stuff. So why don't you tell us real quick about Gamers Tavern and where people can find that?
Well, Gamers Tavern is basically my personal brand at this point in time. I ran a podcast from 2013 to 2017 where I had a host, Ross Watson, who is a game designer. We talked about role-playing games for several years, about 60 episodes worth of shows. I also do live streams on Twitch. I have a YouTube channel where I do videos about role-playing game history, the foundations of where all of these games came from. And also little bits and pieces about the behind the scenes of the design of the game. And you can find all that stuff out at gamerstavernshow.com.
And you do, you have a website, a Twitch channel, and all of that stuff. And I've checked out.
Twitch channel is Gamers Tavern Show as well.
Okay. And I've checked out, you've done, you got videos on like Battletech and your Dragonlance video was fantastic. You went really deep on Dragonlance. So if people want, when Darryl does a video or a podcast or whatever, he'll be like, I'm working on this, and it might take him 2 or 3 weeks to get it out. But when it comes out, it's very detailed and very well researched and highly edited. Darryl is also, the way I know Darryl is he is the editor, the audio engineer, etc. on Morrus's Unofficial Tabletop RPG Talk podcast. And Darryl also does I know you do some stuff for Ian World. Are you a
I write
news
the
gatherer?
News Digest column every week that summarizes all the news on the site and other news around the world for role playing games. And I also do the weekly email newsletter. So if you sign up to the newsletter, that's me.
Okay, so you don't do much. You don't have anything going on. So, and I also know you recently had a birthday. So happy birthday to you.
Thank you very much. I am now officially 40.
Yeah. So well, that's
something
40,
about my lawn and getting off of it, or I don't know.
40 is the new 29. Don't worry about it. Okay. So anyway, I do encourage you to check out Darryl's stuff. He highly researches it. Sometimes on his Twitch stream, he'll be playing a game and he'll have devs of the game on with him while he's playing it and that sort of thing. So
yeah, I actually played Shadowrun, Dragonfall, and had one of the designers of the Shadowrun tabletop game, Kevin Zarnecki. He's also a professional voice actor. He was the co-host on those streams. Right now we're doing Gabriel Knight. We're actually streaming that tomorrow night.
Right.
But yeah, we basically, that game took 3 times longer than it should have to play because we kept stopping and going into deep dives in Shadowrun lore.
But that's what I like. I mean, I want I like that kind of thing. So I don't mind if it takes a while, if there's some good digressions that are.
I mean, people sure aren't coming to watch me play video games because I'm not that good.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, you're pretty good at Battletech, what I've seen of your Battletech stuff. You know more about it than I do anyway. So anyway, all right. So let's, we're going to be talking about Shadowrun today. The RPG, the lore, the setting. Is there any Shadowrun news that is worth mentioning before we dig into all that?
Pretty much the biggest news right now is the newest edition, which came out at Gen Con last year, the 6th edition of the game. I have a full review of the beginner box for it up on my website, and Ian World has one of the core game. But I actually love this new edition. It's got a lot of new features that make it feel a lot more modern while still maintaining the same Shadowrun feel of the rules from going all the way back to, I started in 2nd edition back in like 91, 92.
Wow.
So that's how long I've been playing.
Right.
But it still has that same feel to the game, but it's got a lot of new aspects to it, specifically the karma pool system, which if you've ever played Savage Worlds, it plays a lot like bennies, but you're encouraged to spend them instead of hoard them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a lot of games, especially with the Modifius 2D20 system and some other systems out there, that it's like they want you constantly spending advantages. Like if you get points or something, it's like spend it, you'll get more. So it's like this constant flow. Yeah, I've noticed that's kind of a trend in current game design. So.
Well, while we're on the subject of Shadowrun and podcasts, I do want to give a shout out to some friends of mine. It's called the Shadowcasters Network.
Okay.
There are a network of podcasts that are all about Shadowrun, actual play podcasts, discussions of game design rules, tips and tricks for playing the game. They cover pretty much anything you can think of about Shadowrun over there.
Cool.
Opti is the reason why I'm able to maintain that claim that I'm the greatest Shadowrun expert, because he started working on the game line. But he has an amazing series of podcasts going over Shadowrun's history and deep dive lore. He's been doing it for years now, and it covers so much ground.
Okay.
I highly recommend it.
I'll make a note to add that to the show notes. Shadowcasters Network, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So what I want to do, Darryl, this is how I want to set this up. A few months back, you did a podcast with Morrus on their podcast where you did a pretty deep review of Shadowrun 6th edition, including going into like mechanics and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So what I want to do is I'd rather this to be more of a companion podcast to that rather than trying to retread the ground that you guys already tread so ably in that. And if people want to know more specifically about Shadowrun 6th edition, the mechanics, what Darryl likes about it, what Darryl doesn't like about it, what's changed, what's the same, that sort of thing, I will link in the show notes, but just look for more. Go to morrus.podbean.com, and episode 60-something is their Shadowrun 6th edition review. So if you want a deep dive into Shadowrun 6th edition, go listen to that. What I want this show to be, because for me personally, a huge appeal of Shadowrun isn't the mechanics. I'm actually a system promiscuous guy. I love learning new games. I love learning the math and the mechanics and how the dice work and all that. But what I want this show to be is the setting, the lore, the richness of what Shadowrun is. Because I think that first and foremost is the appeal that I have. That's what's kept me checking back in with Shadowrun over the years.
I know Peter over on Morrus's Unofficial Tabletop RPG Talk, he likes to say every time we talk about Shadowrun, great setting, shame about the rules.
Yeah, and
I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do see where he's coming from.
Well, it's a stereotype, the buckets of dice and all that, and
it is on the crunchier end of rule systems, but the setting is absolutely amazing, and it is definitely the selling point for the game. I
agree, and I like a dice pool system. I'm not against a dice pool system at all. But I think that it's covered between your Gamers Tavern stuff out there and then, what Morrus and Peter and you did just a few months back, that stuff's out there. So if this podcast today whets anybody's, or radio show today, that'll also be a podcast, whets anybody's appetite, go check that stuff out. But the lore of Shadowrun is bonkers cool. And
it is deep.
Yeah, it's deep.
There's so much to it. You can pick any one little slice of Shadowrun lore, and you can find so much that already exists out there in the terms of novels, adventures, source books that exist over the game's last year was the 30th anniversary.
Right. Yeah, that's
30-year history of this game.
Right. It's been out. It first released in 1989. It's had multiple editions, which we'll get into some Shadowrun trivia later. But I'm going to let Darryl set up what Shadowrun is by talking about what Shadowrun is not. Okay? So sometimes I think that's the best way to describe something, because people have probably seen Shadowrun here and there, whether it's a video game or a book or whatever, or the tabletop RPG, and have assumptions about what it is. And I'm going to give Darryl an example that he can say it is not this, because I've had very good discussions with him online about this. So I'm not doing this to tease you, Darryl. This is an honest setup to let you explain what Shadowrun is. Okay, there was a movie that came out a couple of years ago that had Will Smith, and there was another fine actor, and it was basically Will Smith was a cop teamed up with like an orc or a goblin or something like that, and it was called Bright. Cop. What's that?
Bright.
Yeah.
AKA Orc Cop.
Orc Cop. And it was called Bright. And the memes started going around like, Shadowrun did it first, or this is just Shadowrun or something like that. And Darryl is like, no, it's not. Shadowrun is so much more than Bright was. Bright is not Shadowrun. So using that as your tee-off point, tell us what Shadowrun is, Darryl.
It actually has gotten a lot easier to describe Shadowrun in the modern day than it was when I was a kid. Easiest way to describe it is the Dresden Files meets Neuromancer with leverage.
Okay.
Or burn notice, depending on which style of play you want. If you want to do the I sneak in and be stealthy, that's leverage. If you want to do the I blow everything up, that's burn notice. But it's the entire concept is it's an urban fantasy game with cyberpunk mixed together. It's got a big, deep history. It's everything you think of cyberpunk, hacking computers with your brain, replacing parts of your body with cybernetics, mixed with there's elves, there's dragons, there's magic is returned to the world. There's the cyberpunk mega corporations that are just dominate the entire economic landscape, except one of them is owned by a great dragon.
Right. Yeah, so it is another way to think of it, and I think that was a great way to do it. But it's got elves, orcs, trolls, dwarves, humans, wizards, shamans, cyberpunk people, street samurai that have Chrome installed to make them total, bad dudes. And so it's this great fusion and mesh of cyberpunk, which cyberpunk isn't just the technology. Cyberpunk is a feel, it's an atmosphere, it's an oppressive,
Put the punk back in cyberpunk.
Right. It's punk, not just cyber, right? And so it's normally when you have elves, dwarves, trolls, all that stuff, there's epic high fantasy. This is not epic high fantasy. This is if you want a quick
heist movie.
Yeah, if you want a quick mind picture, it's the darkness of Blade Runner with these fantasy elements. And there's a wonderful lore reason why this has happened. So and when you Shadowrun, you're doing basically dark ops. You're doing Skunkworks dark ops as a freelance operative for the mega corporations, because mega corporations, I think, is it 10? Are there 10 mega corporations that are basically running everything, Darryl?
I believe currently there are 10. It does change throughout the game's history. Some mega corporations, a couple of mega corporations have actually fallen in the game's history, and some of them have made it up to the 10 largest. Corporations are ranked by AAA, AA, and single A. AAAs are the biggest ones in the game. That would be like for anyone who's actually nothing, that's your Ares, your Horizon, your Seder Krupp, those type of corporations.
Right. Oh, there's your kitty. Who was that kitty?
Like Lone Star, and that is Harry, named after Harry Dresden.
Okay, yeah, from the Dresden Files, which is the Dresden Files is basically detective noir, but the guy's a wizard in a kind of a dark urban magic. It's a wonderful it's a wonderful series. So. But imagine like Philip Marlowe, but he's in a magical world and he can cast magic. So, but it's still like it's urban fantasy. It's not like castles and knights and stuff like that. It's like
exactly. He lives in Chicago,
right? Exactly.
He's in the Yellow Pages.
Yeah. So yeah, right. Okay, so you got these mega corporations, and they're still governments, but they've been fractured. And in a lot of cases, the mega corporations have more power than the governments, which is a very important part of cyberpunk. Because
speaking of the news, that's actually one of the current storyline book just came out earlier, late last month or earlier this month. It's called Cutting Black, and it actually comes up with the what was the United States. It's now the United Canadian American States, because the two countries merged after a bunch of catastrophes happened in history. But them trying to exert their power over the mega corporations and the fallout of what happens with them trying to say, hey, we're just as powerful as you corps are.
Right.
And
the corps are like, we'll see about that.
May not be the case.
Yeah, the corps are like, we'll see about that. So, and that is a very large part of cyberpunk, is that capitalism has it's like capitalism run absolutely wild and pushed to its most final state without any morality or anything like that guiding it.
It's the last stages of late stage capitalism.
Yeah, it's just, and this is not a political podcast, I don't, or radio show. I don't want to say, but that's the conceit of the game, and the conceit of cyberpunk is morality and governments were unable to limit capitalism, and it just went berserk. So the corporations are ruling everything. And like, if you want police protection, you have to keep your Lone Star account up to date. So instead of subscribing to Netflix, you subscribe to Lone Star, and as long as your account's up to date, the private police force will help you. Is that right?
Pretty much. It's usually done by like neighborhoods or cities,
right?
Contract. But it's, instead of the city has a police force, they hire a corporation who acts as private security for the entire city. If you've ever seen RoboCop, that was what that movie was about, was Omni Consumer Products.
That's a very good, yeah.
That's kind of what Lone Star is except even more so than it was in that movie.
Right. And then you have these wonderful, one of the things I've always loved about Shadowrun is like the whole dock wagon concept. Like like if everything is so privatized and commercial, like if the city is so dangerous in parts, like an ambulance isn't going to come get you. You have to have these almost like tactical special ops squads.
Yeah, it's called high threat response teams. It's a combination of paramedics and SWAT.
Yeah, and they'll come in and get you.
Who will show up and pull you out of the middle of, if you get shot in the middle of a mugging or something, they show up loaded for bear to get you out. And they're there for their customers and their customers only.
Right.
You don't have a dock backing account, they will leave you bleeding on the sidewalk.
Right. Yeah. And depending on what your level, like you might have the bronze or the platinum, or depending on what your account level is with dock wagon,
it's how fast they show up.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding.
Yeah, it's just all this bonkers fun. And then in the middle of this cyberpunk, this oppressive, sad, cyberpunk, mega corporations run wild. Then you've got trolls and orcs and elves and all this stuff.
The game takes place mainly in Seattle. And right next to Seattle is what used to be Oregon. It's now called Shire, and it's the elf country. It is ruled by elves. Right.
So you got all this other stuff going on. So in the middle of all this crazy technology and future way, it's everything's ultra capitalistic and the corporations are doing everything that they can get away with, and you've got literally a dragon running a corporation and all this other stuff. Then you've got the humanity has changed. Now it's called meta-humanity. And, I was listening to your podcast with Morrus and Peter again to get ready for this. And Peter explained it. I thought he had a really good analogy to explain the world of Shadowrun. Okay, so to set this up, there's another game. Shadowrun started with a company called FASA, which for old school gamers, FASA is a big name. For modern gamers, you may never have heard of it, even though there is a FASA out there, but it's not the FASA from however long ago.
It is and it isn't. It's complicated legal corporate maneuverings, but that's another show.
Right, exactly. So Darryl is also an expert in legal stuff, especially when it comes to like BattleTech. But anyway, all right.
I wouldn't call myself an expert. I'm not legally trained. I just read a lot about this stuff.
You are an armchair scholar.
Armchair scholar is a good title.
Okay. Yes. Which there's no, some, you know more than I do. But anyway, so there was a game, Shadowrun is the setting is called the Sixth World.
Yes.
And then the world we're in right now, which is, non-magical and all, is the Fifth World. And then before that, there was a fourth world, which is covered in a game called Earth Dawn. And that was basically, and I'm oversimplifying it, it was a Dungeons and Dragons style fantasy game that was put out by.
It was very, very, very much more traditional. What you think of if I said a fantasy role playing game, that's a lot more of what you would think of with Earth Dawn.
So it was fantasy, and then Shadowrun and Earth Dawn are in the same setting. And so
share characters.
Yeah, they share characters. There could be a dragon that went to sleep and woke up in Shadowrun.
Most of the dragons in Shadowrun are in Earth Dawn. There's several what's called immortal elves who survived through the fifth world into the sixth world. So you'll see crossover between those characters as well. Harlequin being probably the most popular or most loathed, depending on who you ask.
Yeah, Harlequin is one of the. Even the most casual of Shadowrun players or whatever kind of know that there is a character called Harlequin that exists, and either meddles or helps.
They will have opinions one way or the other.
Yeah, either meddles or helps. But anyway, so what happens is, and Peter described it as a sine wave, so it'll wave that magic rises and falls, and each time it rises and falls, you enter like another world. So we've gone to the fourth world, then magic went away. And the magical beast and all that. And we went to the fifth world, which is the regular world we know. And then Shadowrun is the sixth world, where on December 24th, 2011, magic returned. And meta-humanity...
Muyo bursts through Mount Fuji, awakening from his slumber in front of a packed passenger train as a great dragon, and everyone now knows magic has returned.
Magic has returned, and in the ensuing weeks and years... some normal people suddenly became dwarves, elves, orcs, whatever. They just kind of transformed. And then, new variations of humanity are being born. So not only has magic returned and magical beast returned, but the meta-humanity is now normal again. So if you go to your office, if you're a wage slave, which is when you play Shadowrun, you're not a wage slave. You're somebody who doesn't want to be part of the system, and you're sinless, which means you don't have an SIN, which is basically kind of like a Social Security number.
Social Security number. It's system identification number. It's your ID.
Right. So to function in the normal world,
you have a sin, and it may not be a governmental sin. You may be a citizen of the Ares Corporation. You may be a citizen of Renraku, which is you are a citizen of a corporation. Not of a country.
Yeah. See, that's what I'm saying. You could be a citizen of a corporation, and corporations are. You can be in the what's one of the main? Is it the Confederate? What's one of the in Seattle? Is there any government at all, or is it all corporation?
Seattle has the city government of Seattle, which is actually considered a state under the UCAS because it's a free state.
So it's a city state.
Complicated political thing, but it's basically a city state, but it does belong to the United Canadian American states.
So that gives, if you look at a map of what used to be the United States in Shadowrun, it's like split into at least three, and there's all
California has become its own nation unto itself. A big chunk of the Midwest and the West, North Dakota, Wyoming, all of that is now part of what's called the Native American nations. So they have gotten their sovereignty back and taken back their ancestral tribal lands. The United States and Canada have merged into one country, and then the Confederate American states have also seceded. So the southern United States is its own country.
So it's all split up. And then in Seattle, for example, which is its own city state and has its own government, if you go into a corporate building, if your corporation is big enough,
you're not on UCAS property anymore. You're on corporate property, extraterritoriality.
Right.
So you're not subject to UCAS laws anymore. You're subject to Renraku laws, MCT laws, Horizon laws, whatever the corporation is. You are under their jurisdiction in their laws, and they're the ones who enforce them.
So you literally, it's like when you go to an embassy, if you go to the U.S. embassy in another country, while you're in the embassy, you're on that country's soil. And it's like that. So corporations are very powerful. So if you're a wage slave, which means you have a SIN, one of those identification numbers, and you go to work, like you could be an elf working next to a human, and across from you could be a troll. I mean, it's just it's normal now for this and like you go to LA and there's like Chinatown. Well, now there might be neighborhoods that are trolls or, whatever.
And Seattle has the Orc Underground.
The Orc Underground. So you got all this stuff going on, and that's the world of Shadowrun, okay? Which there's so much more we could go into. There's 30 years. They have arcologies. The very first time I ever even heard of an arcology was in the Shadowrun 2nd edition book, and that's these huge buildings that is like an apartment building, a mall, part. You could live your whole life in this arcology and never leave it. So
300-story plus buildings that are all completely self-contained, complete with their own fusion generators.
Right. So it's very Blade Runner, it's very whatever. And then you also have all these fantasy elements, and you have all these competing corporations involved in corporate espionage, which leads into Shadowrunners.
Come in.
Yeah, which leads into Shadowrunners. So now we're going to get into what is a Shadowrun? Why is this game called Shadowrun? And we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to keep talking with Darryl Mott, the self-proclaimed, and I believe he backs it up, most knowledgeable Shadowrun expert that has never worked on the game. When we come back on Shane Plays Geek Talk.
Comic book lovers, visit thewildstars.com today. From the mind of author and comic book industry expert Michael Tierney, it's not just a comic book, it's a comic book novel. The Wild Stars is sci-fi and so much more. Learn the explanations behind UFOs and space gods. This isn't the Twilight Zone. This is the region of the Milky Way galaxy known as The Wild Stars. We guarantee you've never read anything like it. The complete comic book novel took 20 years to tell, with one reviewer noting, the story of the Wild Stars stretches ambitiously across space and time, from small-town murders to the destruction of planets, with every event given multiple layers of meaning. If you haven't read The Wild Stars, you're missing out. Visit thewildstars.com today.
Are you a fan of thrilling adventure, daring suspense, and just a touch of romance? Kursova has you covered. Since 2016, Kursova has been publishing the very best in contemporary fantasy and science fiction, retro pulp, and for you D&D gamers, Appendix N style fiction. Based in Little Rock, you can pick up their flagship magazine locally or at Michael Tierney's The Comic Book Store on Treasure Hill Road or Collector's Edition on JFK in North Little Rock. Swing by one of Michael's stores and pick up an issue or find them on Amazon. C-I-R-S-O-V-A. Doesn't start with a K, it starts with a C. C-I-R-S-O-V-A, Kursova Magazine. Check them out today. You want to go ahead and throw out some love to Game Goblins. Some goblins are your friends. Game Goblins is Central Arkansas's premier retailer of Magic the Gathering, Warhammer 40k, board games, card games, RPGs, miniatures, and hobby accessories. Call Game Goblins at 501-224-GAME or visit them online at gamegoblins.com. That's 501-224-GAME or gamegoblins.com. Conveniently located 1121 South Bowman, right on the corner of Bowman and Canis in West Little Rock, and staffed by friendly employees, Game Goblins has expanded their store size, and there is plenty of room for exciting inventory and tables for play space. You'll like that space because Game Goblins has gaming events every day of the week. For all of your gaming needs, I heartily recommend Game Goblins. Make sure to check out their customer loyalty program that rewards you based on your actual purchases. Game Goblins earns your business and keeps it. First-time customers, mention Shane Plays and receive $10 off your purchase of $50 or more. Tell them Shane Plays sent you. And folks, if you do visit any of my sponsors, please tell them that you hear about them on the show. That helps them know that their advertising money and the relationship we've built is time and money well spent. Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/Shane Plays. Hey, welcome back to Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. We're talking today about Shadowrun, the Shadowrun RPG and the rich lore and setting behind it. Get back to that with our guest Darryl Mott here in one moment. Want to throw out some quick show notes. You know, you can always call in at 501-823-0965. You can tweet me at Shane Plays. I do my best to monitor the Twitter during the show to respond. And then, of course, if you go to the Dave Ellswick Show page on Facebook, the live video is out there, and I try to keep an eye on the comments there. And speaking of that, I want to give a shout out to my cousin, Christina Cagle. She always watches the live stream and shares it and is a big supporter of the show. And I just appreciate you very much, Christina. Hope you're enjoying today's show. So, other couple of quick things. If you're listening delayed by podcast or, Krypton Radio or any other ways, all the show notes will be up at shaneplays.com. That's ShanePlays.com. Our last show is up. It's episode 212, where we had Timothy Lim and Mark Pellegrini and Justin Mobley on talking about Common America and indie comics and the Sonic movie and all that. So go check that out. The show does go out as a podcast on the blog, iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Podbean, SoundCloud, YouTube, and more. And Shane Plays is also carried on Krypton Radio. Krypton Radio is sci-fi for your Wi-Fi. KryptonRadio.com. So now on with the show with Darryl and Shadowrun. So I wanted to ask you this real quick, Darryl. My engineer, Zach, who didn't get to talk last week because he had to... Did you make your thing in time last week with all the crazy stuff going on?
Oh, yeah.
You did make it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. So Zach is a big sports guy. So I got to ask Darryl, when meta-humanity happened and all the new races reappeared, or the old races, did they have big arguments and discussions? Can trolls and humans play football together? Or do they have like a troll league and a human league and an orc league? How did they work all that out?
There is actually a source book.
I knew there would be.
There was one for first edition, one for fourth edition, and one that came out. It was one of the first books for sixth edition. The name of it has fallen out of my head, though, and I can't see my bookshelf right now.
The source book that Darryl is referring to is the No Future source book. It was one of the first source books to come out for sixth edition. There will be a link to it in the show notes.
It's one of the few books that's out there, but it is the entertainment and pop culture source book for the sixth world.
Right.
It explains
All
what
that.
television and everything else is like, and it talks about sports and how some sports were everybody's welcome, cyber up, troll linebackers,
Yeah.
with muscle replacements, physical adapts. We don't care. Then there's new sports that popped up like combat brawl. Which
I'd
is
watch.
where
Would you watch that? Would you watch Combat Balls, Zach?
If I were to see a video, like check it out, maybe.
Well, yeah, I mean, just the very idea doesn't entice you.
It's
Yeah.
12 square city blocks, and one block is a goal for each side, and they're firing live ammunition at each other in body armor, trying to score goals. And anything goes. Cybernetics, implants, magic, spells. The only thing you're not allowed to do is mind control.
That's it.
That's
all you can.
interesting.
Yeah, because there is
And
magic.
there's a player called an Outrider that rides a motorcycle, too.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't. I don't think we. I mean, we've stressed it some, but there is magic is very much a part of daily life. You got wizards, you got shamans.
Yeah.
You've got all this crazy stuff going on. So I mean, there's people throwing fireballs while somebody's shooting a submachine gun back at them, and I mean, it's crazy. It's a lot of fun.
It could be the same person casting a fireball in one hand and a submachine
gun in the other. And then the troll's not only super huge, but he's wearing body armor. So it's just it's wacky. But with everything going on, Zach, I didn't get a chance. What was your take, real quick? Your elevator take on the Super Bowl?
Oh, it was a very good game, and of course the team I was rooting for didn't win, but it was a very good game, and I love the commercials and the halftime performance. I enjoyed it all.
Really? So I didn't. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big football guy, but I know you are. Did you happen to see the superb owl flying over? I heard it was quite superb this year.
I saw. Oh my God.
Once a year, the entire nation gathers.
Meme really blew up, didn't it?
It did, yeah. I didn't know. I kind of came up with it 2 or 3 years ago. I didn't know,
Right.
and then I saw that other people were doing it too. So
Yeah, they started doing that on a website called FARC, F-A-R-K.
yeah, I remember FARC. Yeah.
Okay.
Like back 10 years ago.
Well,
I wanna
maybe
say,
that's why I saw it first and I forgot.
Because the NFL was making a big deal about companies using the word Super Bowl
Yeah.
if they weren't official sponsors.
So then
So they started
superb owl.
calling it the Superb Owl.
That is
I love it. All right. So anyway, back to Shadowrun. The reason the game is called Shadowrun is because in the middle of all this awakened humanity, meta humanity, you got Blade Runner elements, you've got cyberpunk elements, you've got dragons, you got orcs, wizards, whatever. You've got all this craziness. So, but you have to remember that shaping all of this, the corporations have run amok and are basically more powerful than countries if you're large enough as a corporation. And when you have corporations, you have espionage and industrial espionage and corporate espionage. So they need people to do this, which is where the Shadowrunners come in. So tell us about Shadowrunners, Darryl.
Shadowrunners are deniable black ops assets for corporations and pretty much anyone else who can hire them, although it is pretty pricey. But even like you get people like even storekeepers or gangs will hire Shadowrunners sometimes. But you're basically a freelance thief or explosives expert,
or
maybe
muscle
even an assassin.
Yeah.
Maybe you're a bodyguard, but you're some sort of gray market or black market freelancer who commits crime for money.
Right. And
you're committing crime for one corporation is hiring you to commit crimes against another corporation. So it's not, and it's considered the price of doing business. So it's not quite as black hat as it sounds.
But nobody wants to admit that they're doing it, but everybody's doing it. And that's how, it's how things are happening. So you may be hired to steal a digital file, or you may be you may be hired to go in and kidnap somebody or kill somebody or destroy a piece of technology or bioorganic research. So if it's shady and it benefits one corporation over another, you may be hired to do it. And remember, you're freelance. So in D&D and Melodica, you're a quote unquote adventurer. In this, you have unplugged. You don't want to be a part of normal society. You've given up your SIN, which is your identification number, which is basically a social security number. You've removed yourself from society, so you don't have as much of a footprint, so you're more deniable. And the way you earn your living, because you've unplugged yourself from the grid, if you will, is by running these Shadowruns. And you might be hired by one corporation, and the corporation never hires you directly. They use an in-between that's usually called Mr. Johnson. Say, I've got a meeting with Mr. Johnson, and Mr. Johnson will give you the details and pay you and all of that stuff. And then, and you never know. I mean, one week you might be hired to do a run on behalf of a corporation, and the next week another corporation might hire you to run against the corporation that you did work for the week before. You're freelance. And so think of these.
You could get hired by the same corporation you just finished a job against.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because it's
God, they did such a good job stealing that prototype from us. We need to hire them to get it back.
We need to hire them, right? And so it's all done. It's all very, it's kind of half military action, half spy kind of thing. And a team, a Shadowrun. It's possible to do a Shadowrun on your own. And let's talk about some of the archetypes real quick. You don't really have classes in Shadowrun. You have archetypes, but you have a decker, which is what most people would think of as a hacker. And they're the ones handling all the quote unquote hacking the internet, even though it's much more complex and
plugging
cool.
your computer into the brain, going into virtual reality and hacking computers with your mind.
Yeah, you have a port in your head and you run a wire into it to your deck, which is your computer. So it's like a laptop, but so much more than that. And then you have riggers who control machines with their mind.
Robots, drones, vehicles.
Right. You have street samurai, which are basically the warriors. They're usually chromed up, which means they have cyberware. They can pop claws, or they have
like combat experts with enhancements that tend to focus on combat, either attack or defense, one of the two.
Right. I mean, you can have a gun that's wired directly into your brain, and like RoboCop was. And then you've got shamans, which do more of a ritualistic type magic. Then you have wizards, which do more. I'm casting spells. What am I missing?
The face.
The face.
The face is your con artist, the one who does the talking.
He's probably your rogue analog, even though it's not a 1-1 comparison, but he's your fast talker and your,
And then you usually also have another role that's like infiltration specialist. That's your stealth person.
Right.
That's the one that's able to sneak in and cut glass with their tool while remember Parker from Leverage is the perfect infiltration expert archetype.
Right. So think of these heist movies, and you have this collection not only of all these different types of people, but then different races. You got an elf next to a dwarf, next to a human, next to a troll, and they all not only are they a unique race, but they have a unique role. They work together tightly as a team, whether they like each other or not, and they pull off a heist, or they hopefully pull off a heist. And that's a Shadowrun. You go on a run. It usually involves, you're going to have, the reason you have all these different roles is because each run usually has, we got to physically break in, we got to take people out, we got to hack the internet. I got to put my
Decker's got to hack the security cameras and the alarm so they don't go off. Person's got to sneak into the vault and actually pick the lock.
Right.
You got to have you got to have your face to make sure you can get past all the security guards, and got to have your street samurai there in case something goes wrong and the shooting starts happening. And of course, you need your shaman or your mage around for the patrols, because the corporations have their own mages. They're going to have spirits that they've attached to the building, and they're basically summoned elementals and spirits that are there guarding the building.
Right.
You have to have someone magical to take care of that.
Yeah, so it's just crazy. It's just a lot of fun. And then sometimes they were like, break into the vault and take the only thing in there. You don't even know what you're getting. So you bust open the vault and there's like 10 ghouls and they're out to, you never know what the heck is going to happen. It could be a virus. It could be, you just don't know. And sometimes you have to make incredibly hard moral choices because it's an incredibly hard world to live in morally. It is not a moral world at all. And you're trying to
these aren't like hordes of evil, always chaotic evil goblins that you're breaking into the lair to rescue someone. These are security guards working at a company. They're just doing their job.
And you're having to geek
these
them.
are the people, and you have to decide, are you going to, if it's their job to fire at you, are you going to shoot back at these people who are just doing their job?
Right. So it's a wonderful setting. And like I said, I think the game system is fine. It's a dice pool system. You build your characters. It's, you set, this is the, in order to accomplish this task, this is the number you have to hit, and then you roll a dice pool and you get into all that. But and I like it just fine. But to me, the real appeal of Shadowrun is the setting and the lore. So we've only got about 4 or 5 minutes left, Darryl. So radio goes so quick. I wanted to touch on some other stuff real quick here to give people an idea of the breadth and the rich history of Shadowrun. So here's some numbers here. Oh, and before I forget, if you really want to take a good bite of what the Shadowrun, I've played Shadowrun off and on for years, and it really didn't coalesce perfectly into my brain until I read a book that Darryl recommended called 2XS, numeral 2, letter X, number S, 2XS. That does a really good job of explaining what it feels like to be in the Shadowrun world. So
by Nigel Finley, it is one of my, not just my favorite licensed books, it is one of my favorite books of all time.
Right. So I would recommend it. So here's some numbers real quick. Shadowrun was first published in 1989. It has had 7 editions. Do you count the 20th anniversary as an edition, or is that just a modification?
I don't, although a lot of people do, because the difference between 4th edition and 20th anniversary is pretty significant. It's about the same between D&D 3rd edition and 3.5. It's the same edition, but it's changed so much that it's almost a new edition, but not quite.
Okay.
So it depends on who you ask, really.
Okay. So either 6 or 7 editions, depending on who you ask. So you had 1st edition 1989, 2nd edition in 1992, 3rd edition in 98, 4th edition in 2005. Then you had the 20th anniversary in 2009, 5th edition in 2013, and we just recently had the 2019 6th edition, and that's through Catalyst Game Labs where that's at. The Shadowrun has also had a trading card game. I think then it's had an action figure game that from WizKids that unfortunately didn't succeed called Shadowrun Duels, which was HeroClix but with normal action size figures for some reasons. It's had 2 magazines, 8 video games, one of which I don't think released. And there's some one
of them was only released in Japan.
Is that how to? Okay, a lot of people remember the old, was it SNES? The old SNES
there was
Shadowrun.
an SNES, and there was a Sega Genesis one that a lot of people liked one or the other, depending on which system they had. But the SNES one had such amazing music. Yeah,
it's got good music. It's sort of an action RPG type thing. It's had over 50 novels, in its history. And I have to say that even though I'm more of a fantasy player, the cover art by Easley, I know it was definitely on the 2nd edition. I can't remember if it was on the 1st, where it shows the guy hacking the ATM and then the elf covering
that was
with magic.
First and 2nd edition. That was Larry Elmore.
Is it Elmore? Yeah, I always say Easley when I mean Elmore. That is one of the best pieces of RPG art ever. It captures what Shadowrun is. So great. So Rook, I got to wrap us here in about a minute. Would you recommend people start with the 6th edition, Darryl?
Definitely start with the 6th edition. It is brand new, so there's not a lot of times when you get into a role-playing game, you'll get inundated with just so many books that are out there. Right now, the edition just got started. You've got the core rule book. You've got a couple of books that are about the plot that'll get you caught up. The Neo-Anarchist Streetpedia is a great way to get caught up on the lore. You've got one plot book. You don't have a bunch of splat books to worry about. All the rules are in the core book.
And there's also quick start rules out there, because I ran that adventure in the quick start, even though we don't have time to go into it, but I know you had lamented that it wasn't food fight. Okay, so people go check out Shadowrun. I really recommend it. It's a cool game. And there's also more of a narrative version of Shadowrun called, is it Anarchy? More of like a fate
Shadowrun
kind?
Anarchy.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
a lot closer to Fate.
Oh, yeah.
in terms
People
of
can
rules.
check that out as well. Okay, Darryl, thanks so much for your time. We got to do the bad joke of the week. And folks, don't forget to check out Darryl's Gamers Tavern stuff. Go check that out. But here's the bad joke of the week, just for Darryl. A human, an elf, and an orc walk into a bar. The dwarf laughs.
I get it.
That is the correct
I get it.
response. Darryl, thanks so much. Folks, check out Shadowrun, and we'll catch everyone next week on Shane Plays.
Thank you for having me.
I want to get online. I need a computer.
Where'd you learn to do that?
I used to have a summer job, breaking and entering. I need a Sinologic 16, Sogo 7 data gloves, a GPL stealth module, one Birdine intelligent translator, and Thompson iPhones.
Password enter. Welcome to BRT Online.
Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays.